morning, Fiorina. We already have Alexia in the class. Alanis, Christine, and Angel.
Morning din po, sir.
Morning. Kumusta ang inyong bakasyon?
Good morning, sir. Good morning, sir.
Morning. Kumusta ang mga bakasyon mo? How was your first week of online classes? Okay, maybe we can now start our meeting. May I request Christine to lead us the opening prayer. Christine, are you there? We ask Christine to lead us the opening prayer. Where is Christine? Christine? Okay. Good morning, Christine. So Christine will be leading us the opening prayer today. Christine, ready na ating? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
As we forgive those who trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So I hope that you already have seen your grades or your score in the first assessment task or in the assessment which you completed last week. Okay. I hope that those who got a not so good score in the first assessment will do something to get a good score for this week's assessment. Okay. So before we proceed to the next lesson under the next topic under lesson 1, maybe just have to continue our previous discussion on the significance or importance of history. Allow me to share the screen first. So we ended last meeting with the definition and nature of history. So today we will be discussing, we will continue to discuss the other topics under lesson 1, and we start with the relevance or importance of history. Okay. In the new LMS course which you had, or which we had, should I say, there are, I think, a number of things mentioned about the relevance or importance of studying history. But in our presentation for today, we will just be summarizing those importance or those relevance into 5 major relevance or importance of history. So the first one is history bridges the gap between the present and the past. It's through history that would allow us realize how is our past being connected to our present. Okay? And it says here that what we are today is the result of what happened in the past. Whoever we are today and whatever we are today is actually the result of our experiences of the past or our experiences in the past. This would also tell us that that the nature and extent of contemporary problems can best be understood by examining its historical roots. Why, for instance, why are we Filipinos would often do rally or do protest in EDSA, or do protest when we are disgusted with certain political views and others. And we can only understand that if we are to examine what had happened in the past, what had happened in our history, that would best explain that attitudes of Filipinos, that if they have little disgusts or disappointments as regards the government, then we can just we can just move to EDSA or do protest about these things. Okay? So kung titignan natin ang dahilan, makikita natin sa kasaysayan ng Pilipinas na napagdaanan natin ang bagay na ito. Ayaw natin ng maduming gobyerno, ayaw natin ng mga politiko na hindi ginagawa ang trabaho. Kaya naman tayo, dahil meron tayong karanasan ng mga ganito, ay kaagad-agad tayo nagreklamo sa pamamagitan ng protesta o pamamagitan ng rally o kaya sa kalsada at kung saan-saang lugar pa. Okay? This would explain, okay, the way we conduct ourselves now as Filipinos and the way we do things now are actually the result of what we have experienced in the past. That's the first relevance, bridging the gap between the present and the future. Between the present and the past, should I say. Okay, and the next relevance is this. Explaining causes of things and events. It's through delving back in time that would allow us explain the stateside mentality of the Filipinos. Okay, our Western culture. Okay, whether we like it or not, we have that attitude of we prefer Western products. We prefer foreign products because looking at our history, we've been controlled by different countries. We've been controlled by different powerful nations in the past. Okay, for example, during the Spanish colonization, during the American era, or even the Japanese era, we often we often patronize foreign products, foreign mentalities than of our original original attitude, or original, what we call that, original products, or our own experiences as Filipinos. May I request those with noisy background to please mute your microphone so that you are not going to disturb the class. The next one is, under this relevance, history deals with the cause and effect relationship. Please take note that things happen because something had happened first. Okay, the interconnectedness of the events in the past, the interconnectedness, should I say, events would allow us to realize that such event took place because another event happened first. Okay? So yung mga bagay, yung mga pangyayari sa buhay-buhay natin ay dala na rin ng mga pangyayari sa nakaraan. That's what we call as the interconnectedness of the events of the past. Okay, for example, bakit nagkaroon ng proposal ng SOGI Act, o yung parang it's an act as regards promotion of the rights and recognition of LGBTQ or members of the LGBTQIA+ in the Philippines. Because things would tell us that there is something that took place in the past that has caused such occurrence of such act. Okay, so that's explaining causes of things and events. The third one is history projects the future. It's taking stocks of similarities and parallels between the past and the present, also leads to consideration of likely scenarios in the future. Kaya kung nakikita ninyo, parang nakikita ng mga Pilipino ngayon ay yung mga ginagawa ni President Duterte ay parang akma doon sa ginawa din ni President Ferdinand Marcos. We look into the parallelism of things, okay? Of the things that are happening now, the things that are happening now is being parallel into what has happened in the past. Okay, yun ang nakikita natin. Okay, so parang binabantayan natin yung galaw ngayon ng presidente. Marami ang nagbabantay dun sa galaw ng presidente kasi nga nakikita nila yung parang katulad ng ginagawa niya doon sa ginawa ni President Ferdinand Marcos na maraming Pilipino ang natatakot. Okay, because we have that bad experience. Hindi ko naman sinasabi na everything that we had during the Marcos regime is bad or everything is bad, but rather naging mas malaki lang, naging mas kaala-ala lang yung mga negatibong pangyayari ng mga panahon na iyon na nakikita natin na mukhang nangyayari ngayon, kaya natatakot tayo. Kaya maraming nagbabantay dun sa ginagawa ng presidente ngayon. Okay? Next is, present and future intelligent actions spring from sound knowledge of the past. That's why if you observe, okay, political analysts would do that. They would usually equate the things that are happening now to what had happened in the past. Because that is how history is helping us. History would help us project what would happen, what might happen in the future if we look at things that are happening now and equating these things now at present to what had happened in the past. Projecting the future would mean that we should not only look into the past, but rather we have to study the past and the present so that we could be able to project the future. The fourth, as Socrates said, okay, sabi ni Confucius, not Socrates, sabi ni Confucius, study the past if you would define the future. If we really would like to define what the future is, then we have to study the past. But if I may add, it's not just a matter of studying the past, but rather we have to look at the parallelism first of the past and the present so that we could be able to define the future. Sa pamamagitan lamang ng pag-intindi o pag-unawa nung nakaraan, kasama na rin yung pangkasalukuyan para lubusan nating mabigyan ng kahulugan ang hinaharap. Okay? So, if Confucius would tell us study the past, and I would tell you that it would be okay if we also look at the parallelism of the past and the present so that we can be able to define the future and we could be able to foretell the future. And fourth is, history interprets conditions of a given space and time. It provides information and corresponding interpretation of periods of history. Okay? How should we interpret such period of history? Parang this would tell us that we have to understand things, we have to understand events in the past according to its context. Bakit nangyari ito? Interpreting conditions of given time and space would allow us to answer the whys of history. Okay? Pag sinabi nating pag-interpret o pag-interpreta doon sa mga pangyayari sa nakaraan, ang ibig sabihin nito ay titignan natin yung konteksto kung bakit nangyari yung nasabing bagay. For example, bakit nangyari na ang Espanya ay napunta sa Pilipinas at naging kolonya niya ang Pilipinas? Titignan natin yung konteksto. Dahil nga, nagkaroon muna ng interes ang mga banyaga, ang mga mga kanluranin o westerners, okay, sa spices. At dahil doon sa kanilang mithiin na makapaghanap ng mga spices, makapaghanap ng mga iba't ibang rekado para mapanatili ang pagiging sariwa ng mga pagkain, kaya nadiskubre nila ang Moluccas. At sa paghahanap nila ng Moluccas ay nakapunta sila sa Pilipinas. At dahil nakita nila ang kayamanan sa Pilipinas, nagdesisyon sila na manatili sa Pilipinas at sakupin ang Pilipinas. So meaning to say, ito ang konteksto. nung age of colonialism. The age of colonialism, okay, took place after the age of looking for spices. Okay? So, that's interpreting conditions of given time and space. Bakit nagkataon na ang mga Hapon ay napunta sa Pilipinas? Titignan natin yung konteksto niya. Dahil ang konteksto ng kapanahunan na iyon ay, okay, kapanahunan na iyon ay ganito, na ang Japan, okay, na ang Japan ay kaaway nila ang Amerika. At dahil kaaway ng Japan ang United States of America, kasabay na noon ang mga sakop na lugar o sakop na bansa ng United States. At kasama tayo na sakop ng United States. Ito ang kondisyon. Okay? The next one is promoting nationalism and patriotism. It inspires and develops a sense of national pride and sense of devotion to country by recording the exploits of the struggles of our people towards winning our freedom and independence. It's only through understanding how our ancestors have struggled for us to be able to enjoy freedom or democracy that we have now, that we could be able to realize that indeed they are worth to be patronized, they are worth to be appreciated. Okay? It's a sense of national pride that our democracy now, that our freedom now has to be realized, has to be appreciated because we have many Filipino ancestors who struggled and who shed their blood just for us to earn this democracy or to earn our freedom. Kaya dapat tayo, gamitin natin na maayos ang ating kalayaan. Dahil ang kalayaang ating tinatamasa ngayon, ang kalayaan na ating pinagdiriwang ngayon, na meron tayo ngayon, ay bunga ng paghihirap at bunga ng pag-aalay ng buhay at ng dugo ng ating mga kaninununuan. Okay? So it's only through realizing, appreciating how our Filipino ancestors worked hard for our freedom that we could be able to make use of our freedom well and we could be able to appreciate our democracy now. Ngayon, ang tanong ngayon, tayo ba ay merong pagpapahalaga sa ating kalayaan? Dahil kung meron tayong pagpapahalaga sa ating kalayaan, ay ibig lamang sabihin na dapat meron din tayong pagpapahalaga sa ating kapwa. Dapat meron tayong pagpapahalaga sa kalayaan ng ating mga kapwa Pilipino, kalayaan ng ibang tao, kalayaan ng ibang individual. At ibig sabihin nito, dahil meron tayong pagpapahalaga sa kalayaan ng bawat isa, ibig sabihin hindi tayo gagawa ng mga bagay-bagay na makapanakit sa damdamin ng iba. Dahil kung tayo ang dahilan ng pananakit ng damdamin ng iba, ibig sabihin, ninakawan natin sila ng karapatang maging malaya at magkaroon ng magandang damdamin, magkaroon ng mabuting damdamin. Okay? Kung meron tayong pagpapahalaga sa ating kalayaan, hindi ba dapat alalahanin din natin kung paano natin nakamit ang kalayaang ito? Okay? Kung meron tayong pagpapahalaga sa ating bansa ngayon, sa isang malayang bansa ngayon, hindi dapat gawin natin o gumawa tayo ng mga makabuluhang mga bagay-bagay nang sa ganun ay maging kapaki-pakinabang tayo sa ating sariling mga komunidad o barangay. Have we been doing something for our country? Have we been doing something for our community, for our respective communities? Because if not, then that would mean that we are not actually putting value or worth or appreciation to how our early Filipino ancestors worked so hard and even sacrificed their lives, died or being martyred because of our freedom and because of our independence. So these are the 5 big relevance of history. Okay, the one mentioned in the LMS are specific relevance of history, but we just have made use of 5 major importance of history in this discussion. Okay? Now we're done with topic 1. We now proceed to question and answer. Do you have questions? Do you have questions on topic 1? Anyone who would like to ask questions? May we listen to Layla. Layla, you have any question?
None, sir.
Yes, Layla, please.
I have no questions, sir.
No,
Sir?
Layla, question?
I have no questions, sir.
Have no question. Okay, how about Heaven? Heaven, you might have a question, Heaven. Heaven, you have a question, Heaven?
I have no questions, sir.
Okay, good. How about, may we listen to how about Mark Lester? Mark Lester, you have a question?
Sir, wala po.
Wala, Ading?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Now may we continue our discussion then. If there are no questions, may we continue our discussion. May we have the next topic on historical methodology. Okay, may we now proceed to historical method. Okay, now we made mention that we will be looking into primary sources and different sources in multidisciplinary perspective as regards events of the past. And because we have to understand, and because we have to make use of different historical sources for us to understand the different events of the past, then we have to do historical method. But what is all about historical method? Ano ang tinatawag nating metodong pangkasaysayan? Okay, the Filipino historical method is metodong pangkasaysayan. Now, first we define what historical method is. But before that, allow me to present to you the learning outcomes of this lesson. The following are expected things that you would do at the end of this discussion. That you should be able to evaluate primary sources for their credibility, authenticity, and provenance. We will discuss that later. That you should be able to examine an example of a primary source and its corresponding secondary source derived from them. The second learning outcome is your learning tasks for this week before your first quiz next meeting or next week. Okay? Now, we proceed first with this. We made mention of this last meeting in our first discussion, in the first topic which we discussed in lesson 1, about history as reconstruction. Sabi nga natin, history as reconstruction would mean that we have to understand the past or the events of the past, the actualities of the past based from available records. Hence, it's a reconstruction. Sabi nga ni Louis Gatchok, sabi niya, the historian is many times removed from the events under investigation. Okay? There are only few surviving records of primary sources as regards events of the past. Konti na lang natitira. Ang historiador ay walang dudang napakalayo na mula sa kaganapang kanyang isinasalaysay. Ang isinasalaysay ng mga historiador ngayon, ang mga isinasalaysay ng mga manunulat ngayon tungkol sa mga nakaraan ay hindi na ganon kadetalyado dahil nga wala mismo ang manunulat na iyon, wala mismo ang historiador na iyon noong nangyari yung pangyayaring kanyang isinasalaysay. Ito ang ibig sabihin natin ng history as reconstruction. Historians rely on surviving records. Okay, umaasa lamang ang historiador sa mga naiwang tala o sa naiwang mga batis ng kasaysayan, mga sources of history. So kung ano ang naiwan, yun na lamang ang makapagsasabi sa isang manunulat, sa isang historiador, kung ano'y nangyari sa nakaraan. Ito, we look at this. Sabi ni Louis Gatchok, only a part of what was observed in the past was remembered by those who observe it. that only a part of what was remembered was recorded. Only a part of what was recorded has survived. Only a part of what has survived has come to the historian's attention. In Filipino, ganito siya. Iilang bahagi na lamang ng mga nakita sa nakaraan ang naalala ng mga nakakita nito. At iilan na lamang doon sa mga naalala ay naitala. At iilan na lamang doon sa mga naitala ang nabubuhay sa ngayon. At ilan na lamang doon sa mga nabubuhay na naitala ang nakapukaw ng atensyon ng manunulat o ng historiador. So imagine ninyo, no? Imagine. Kaya nga sinasabi natin na history is not actually comprehensive. History does not actually tell us all the details. Bakit? Kasi nga, kukunti na lamang ang nakapukaw sa atensyon ng manunulat, sa atensyon ng historiador. At ipinagpatuloy ito ni Luis Gatchok na sinabi niya, only a part of what is credible has been grasped. And only a part of what has been grasped can be expounded or narrated by the historian. Sinabi natin kanina, na kukunti na lamang doon sa mga nabubuhay na naitala tungkol sa kasaysayan, tungkol sa nakaraan, okay, ang nakapukaw na atensyon ng isang manunulat. At iilan na lamang doon sa credible o nakapukaw sa atensyon ng manunulat ang pwedeng unawain. At iilan na lamang doon sa mga pwedeng maunawaan ang pwedeng bigyang pagpapakahulugan at lalong palawakin ng historiador o ng manunulat. Okay? So, ganun na lang kaliit yung nakarating sa atin ngayon. Okay? Now, we proceed to the definition of what is historical method. Okay. Ano nga ba ang historical method? Having learned about history as Reconstructionism, what historical method now? History as Reconstruction, okay, is the reason why we have to do historical method. Bakit kailangan natin ng metodong pagkasaysayan? Kailangan natin dahil history is reconstruction. Because history is reconstruction because there are only few things about the past that could be actually studied now, that could be actually expounded now, that could actually be explained now. And when we do explaining of events in the past, we need to study it very well. We need to analyze them very well. And we could only analyze them very well when we do historical methodology. When we follow a certain scientific process to understand the past, which has to be expounded, which has to be explained. Okay? Now, while I'll be out for the meantime, okay, for personal necessity, I would like you to study this slide. Okay, later I'll ask someone to explain this definition of historical method. I'll just have to go out for a personal necessity. Okay, while you are studying that part of the slide.
Hello, classmates.
Hello, good morning.
Hello!
Hello.
Good
What's
morning!
up sa inyo mga classmates?
Ala, asan na si Sir?
What's up?
Narinig ka na kayo ni Sir.
Muli mabaho. Moli ligo.
Ligo ka naman.
Okay, okay na? Okay na? Sino ang pwede makapag-explain? Okay nitong part na ito. Maybe we call someone to explain this part. Daniel, please. Daniel. Where's Daniel? Daniel. Daniel is not responding. Okay, we listen to Emmanuel. Emmanuel.
Sir,
Emmanuel, how do you explain this?
morning, sir.
Okay, what do you mean by historical method based from this slide? Emmanuel? Eman?
Sir,
O Eman, ano ibig sabihin?
explain ko, sir, kung anong historical method, sir, or based dyan sa mga naka-state dyan, sir.
Explain mo kung anong historical method. Pwede rin bumase ka o pwede rin ang batayan mo ay itong slide na ito. Emmanuel?
Wait, sir, medyo
Sige. Medyo mahina yung connection mo. Sige, tuloy ko na lang yung discussion, no? Okay. Tuloy ko na lang. Okay, now, this is the definition of historical method. As we have said, okay, as we have said a while back, it's because there are only few things already to be expounded and to be explained by historians or by writers, and there are only few surviving records. Then the more that we need to verify these sources, to date these sources, to locate the origin of these historical sources, and to identify why such source has been created or has been created or has been written. That's what we call as historical method. Historians have to verify sources, to date them, to locate their place of origin, and to identify their intended functions. In Filipino, ang metodong pangkasaysayan ay ang kahulugan ng metodong pangkasaysayan ay ganito, na ang metodong pangkasaysayan ay kailangang gawin ng isang manunulat at kailangan gawin ng isang historiador o ng kahit sino pa man na nag-aaral ng kasaysayan na kailangan niyang matiyak na ang impormasyon hinggil sa kanyang nakalap na batis o source petsa kung kailan ito isinulat o nilikha, pinagmulan nito at ang original na intention kung bakit ito naisulat o nilikha. Okay, we cannot just easily believe into a certain source. Hindi pwede na porque nakita natin ang batis na ito, nakita natin na merong naisulat tungkol sa isang bagay na ito, ay paniniwalaan na natin kaagad-agad ang anumang naitala, ang anumang naisulat doon sa nasabing batis. But we have to do historical method. We have to understand or we have to look into whether this source, okay, this historical source is factual, or if this historical source tells something really about what had happened, the actuality of that event being related to in the said source. So hindi pwede na paniwalaan na lang natin kaagad-agad. Tandaan po natin na ang kasaysayan ay hindi chismis. Okay? Diba? Usually ang chismis naniniwala kaagad yung mga chismosa at chismoso kahit na wala namang basehan ng kanilang mga pinagtatalakay o kanilang pinagchismisan. Yan ay hindi kasaysayan. Ang kasaysayan ay dapat bunga ng pagkakaroon ng metodong pangkasaysayan. Bunga dapat ito ng malalimang pag-aaral para matiyak na totoo ang nasabing pangyayari na isinasalaysay nung nakita nating batis, nung nakita nating historical source. That is historical method. In short, historical method is the process of critically examining and analyzing the records and survivals of the past. Sabi ko nga kanina, we cannot just easily believe into something without doing critical examination, without doing critical analysis of what has been surviving, of what sources have been surviving. In Filipino, ang masalimuot na proseso ng kritikal na pagsusuri at pagtatasa ng mga tala ay iba pang mga gamit o materyales na nagmula sa nakaraang panahon. Kailangan masusi nating pag-aralan. Kailangan masalimuot nating pag-aralan ang mga naiiwang tala tungkol sa nakaraan. We have to understand, we have to analyze well, we have to critically examine so well, okay, these sources before we believe into what they say, should I say, about a certain event. That is historical method. Okay, now, and as we have said that doing historical method would mean verifying the sources, verifying the references, verifying where the event is being derived from, okay? We have to understand what historical sources are. Ano nga ba ang historical sources? In Filipino, okay? In Filipino, ibig sabihin historical sources ay batis pangkasaysayan. Okay? Batis pangkasaysayan. Bakit ang Filipino ng sources ay batis? Di ba remember, the source of water is from, okay, from where? A water source is from batis. Okay? Kaya nga ang Tagalog ng sources ay batis. And a batis ay pinagmumula ng tubig. Ang tubig ay nagbibigay ng buhay. Ang nagbibigay buhay ng kasaysayan ay yung pinagmulan nito, yun yung sources. Okay? So sources is an object from the past or testimony concerning the past on which historians depend in order to create their own depiction of the past. Ito sinasabi natin, no? Kaya sinasabi natin na history is not actually objective. Sometimes, whether we like it or not, the historians, the writers do have their own subjective interpretation of the past, whether we like it or not. Meron tayong kanya-kanyang, kung tayo ay manunulat, kung tayo isang historiador, meron tayong kanya-kanyang pamamaraan kung paano natin sinasalaysay ang pangyayaring ating isinasalaysay. Dahil nga, okay, meron pa ring subjektibong pag-aaral ng nakaraan, dahil tandaan po natin ay ang mga nakaraan, ang kasaysayan ay naisusulat ng isang tao, ng mga otor, ng mga historiador na naaayon sa kanilang sariling perspektibo, sa sariling pananaw sa mga bagay-bagay. Meron silang kanya-kanyang interpretasyon, meron silang kanya-kanyang pagbibigay kahulugan ng mga pangyayari sa nakaraan. Okay? In Filipino, pag sinabi nating batis, ito ay isang gamit mula sa nakaraan o testimonya na may kinalaman sa nakalipas kung saan ibinabatay ng historiador ang kanyang sariling pagtatampok ng nakaraan. Pagtatampok is their own depiction of that past. Halimbawa, itong pangyayari na ginagawa na natin ngayon, itong talakayan na ginagawa na natin ngayon, kapag sinabi ko, pag inutusan ko si Fiona, okay, o di kaya si Mr. Pua, halimbawa, na magsulat ng kanilang pagsasalaysay sa kung ano ang nangyayari ngayon, iba ang pagkakasalaysay ngayon ni Fiona at iba rin ang pagkakasalaysay ni Mr. Pua. Okay? Dahil nga sabi natin, ang mga historiador ay may kanya-kanyang pamamaraan kung paano nila tinatampok ang nakaraang kanilang isinasalaysay, ang pangyayaring kanilang isinasalaysay. Okay? Meaning to say, historical sources are tangible remains of the past. Tangible remains of the past. Ibig sabihin, mga naiwan, mga labi na makapagsasabi sa kung ano ang nangyari sa nakaraan. Okay? Yan nga Filipino niya, mga nakikita o nahahawakang labi mula sa nakaraan. Okay. And there are two forms of historical sources. we have the written sources. Ano yung mga written sources na ito? Published materials, books, magazines, journals. Under this are travelogue, transcription of speech. Okay, we also have number 2, manuscript or any handwritten or type record that has not been printed. Anything that has not been printed. Type recorded, pwede. Handwritten, pwede. Basta hindi siya na electronically print. Okay? These are written sources. Halimbawa, ang diary is a manuscript kasi handwritten usually yan. Okay? Meron ba sa inyo nagda-diary pa rin? Meron ba sa inyo nagda-diary pa rin o Islam book?
Wala na, sir.
Wala na? Archival materials, memoirs, and diary under manuscript. Okay, so these are written historical sources. We also have the non-written sources. Okay, oral history, yung mga kinukwento sa atin. Okay, may mga kwentong bayan ba kayo? Mga kwentong bayan tungkol sa pinagmulan ninyong barangay, pinagmulan ninyong komunidad, o kwentong bayan?
Meron, sir.
Paninunuan, certainly meron. Meron tayong kanya-kanya mga kwentong bayan. Meron tayong mga kanya-kanyang mga kwento ng mga matatanda tungkol sa nakaraan. These are oral histories. The second one is artifact. Okay, mga labi na nakaraan, mga labi na hawakan, okay, mga nahawakan at nakikita na makapagsasabi sa kung ano ang nangyari sa nakaraan. Halimbawa, lumang florera, lumang salamin, lumang letrato. These are all artifacts. Lumang ano tawag doon? Lumang mga kutsara at tinidor, lumang mga Chinese porcelain. These are all examples of artifacts. Ruins, mga labi, mga sira, okay? Mga labi o mga sira-sirang bagay. For example, yung labi noong lumubog na barko, labi nung Titanic, for example, labi ng isang bahay. These are what we call as ruins. Next, fossils. Halimbawa, yung nahukay dyan sa Peña Blanca na mas matanda pa sa Tabonman o Tabonman na nahukay sa Palawan. Okay, na makapagsasabi ng pinagmulan ng mga Pilipino. Okay, the Kalauman, that's an example of a fossil. Artworks, okay, mga sining, okay, na naipinta nung nakaraan. Okay, halimbawa, mga ipininta ni Fernando Amorsolo, mga ipininta ni Luna at mga iba pang mga taong sining ng nakaraan. Okay? Then video recordings, these are non-written sources or audio recordings. Yung ginagawa natin ngayon. Okay, siguro 20 years from now kapag meron makapag-save ng recording nung discussion ng talakayan natin ngayon, ayan ay masasabing non-written source. Okay? Bala niyo isa sa inyo maging santo, no, maging bayani. Halimbawa, sino ba yung mga nandiyan? Halimbawa si Leila later o kaya si Alanis later. Okay, magiging bayani. Okay? So kailangan aralin yung buhay niya at makikita later na dun sa buhay niya sa buhay ni Alanis naging bahagi pa rin pala siya ng klase ni Mr. Herbert Corpus. Okay, nadamay pa ang pangalan ko kapag pagkalipas sa maraming taon, tapos makikita ang kabayanihan ni Alanis. Okay? Magiging pruweba ito na naging estudyante ko siya dahil sa video recordings or even audio recordings. Okay, now we proceed to types of historical resources. Yung kanina sabi ating forms of historical sources. There are two forms, written and non-written. Now this time, we will be discussing about the types of sources. There are three types of sources: primary sources, secondary sources, and tertiary sources. Okay. Now I would like you. I'm giving you 2 minutes or 3 minutes to discuss from among your classmates. O magsalita kayo, no? Kailangan marinig ko nag-discuss kayo. Ano sa tingin niyo pagkakaiba ng primary, secondary, and tertiary source? Okay. So dapat marinig ko na nag-discuss kayo, ha? Okay, you may discuss.
Mention about the
Siguro pakinggan muna natin sino ba yung pwedeng pakinggan natin? Marami na nag-live ba? check natin. Okay, sige. Okay, so nakikita ko ngayon yung marami sa inyo. Okay, so I would like you to discuss, okay, the differences among these three types of historical sources. Let me just clarify, no? Let me just clarify. Non-written and written sources, these are forms of historical sources. Primary, secondary, and tertiary, these are what we call as types of historical sources. Okay? How about the good dancer, Joanna? You're a good dancer, no? Joanna Angel Domingo, you might want to lead the discussion. Mark Vincent, please lead the discussion.
Mark Vincent.
So, hello guys. Um, from the word na primary sources is parang siya yung main. Kung ano yung parang main ng, main ng sources. So, naririnig nyo ba ako guys?
Oo.
Oo. Yes, yes.
Ito yung example neto ng mga primary sources is yung mga evidence na nakareate ng mga historian, ganun. So, yun. Yun lang.
Ano na nangyayari? Daniel, may I see your face, please?
Sir, ako na lang po, sir.
Oy!
Ayun. Okay, so continue. Thank you for the discussion. Okay, at least you were given that opportunity to talk with your classmates. Okay, may we now continue. The first one,
Uy! Nauna yun. Nagtatulo yun.
mute na lahat. Okay? These are primary sources refer to documents or physical objects.
Sir,
And yes.
hello, sir.
Yes, hello. Daniel, are you that? Daniel, ikaw yan?
Sir, ako na lang po mag-explain para...
Sige. Go.
Sir?
Sige.
Sir, the difference of the primary, secondary, and tertiary is, the first one is a primary sources is your own or yung galing mismo sa'yo or yung original material na ginawa. Example, sir, is yung mga diary kasi nanggaling sa'yo yun. Yun. And then, example rin is research. Yung research is more on opinioning primary source yun. While yung secondary source naman, sir, is sample, di ba? Yung nasa primary source, creative. Example yung
Okay, so he is right when he said that primary sources are original documents. Okay, meaning to say this document has to be written or created during the time under study. Okay, for example, kung ano nangyari, kailangan present yung manunulat o present yung nasabing source nung panahon na nangyayari yung pangyayari na kanyang sinasalaysay. That's what we call as primary sources. The writer should be the writer of that source. Okay, the one who created that source should be a witness of the event being narrated to or being expounded to. It offers an inside view of a particular event. An inside view, meaning to say, for example, yung sabi nga ni sabi ni Daniel sabi ni Daniel kanina na kailangan nandoon ako doon sa pangyayari. At kailangan witness ako o saksi ako dun sa pangyayari bago matawag na yung naisulat ko ay isang primaryang source. Okay, or primary source. So that's what we call as primary source. Please take note that primary sources are characterized by their content. Okay, ang primary sources are characterized by their content. Ibig sabihin, ang pinakasukat bago matawag na primaryang batis ang nasabing batis ay yung nilalaman nito. Okay? Kung anong isinasalaysay nito, doon natin makikita kung ito ay primaryang batis o hindi. Regardless of whether they are available in original format or microfilm or microfiche or in digital format or in published format. When we say microfilm, ito yung mga parang recordings of that event. Okay? Recording of that event. Kahit ano pa ang forma nung nasabing primary source, ang lagi nating basehan bago natin tawagan na primaryang batis ay yung nilalaman nito. Okay, ibig sabihin kung ano ang naitala, kung ano ang naisalaysay. Hindi kung nasa original format ba ito o hindi. Hindi yun ang batayan bago matawag ang isang batis na primarya. Okay, it's always the content that would tell us whether such source is primary or not. Kahit pa sabihin natin, for example, mayroon akong diary, ipina-photocopy ko siya. Primary source pa rin ba siya? Yes, primary source pa rin siya. Kasi ang sukatan naman, bago matawag ang isang batis sa primarya, ay yung nilalaman nito. Photocopy ko lang naman siya eh. Okay? I just photocopied the diary, but the content would tell us it's still a primary source. Hindi necessary na original ang nasabing primaryang batis bago mo matawag na original siya. Ang ibig sabihin natin na original, yung dapat yung content ang original. Okay, hindi yung anyo nito. Pwedeng photocopy siya, yung diary, pero yung sinasalaysay yung laman ng nasabing photocopied diary ay original pa rin, then yung tinatawag nating primary source. Okay? Original documents, for example, excerpts or translations, acceptable diaries, speeches, manuscripts, letters, interviews, news film footage, autobiographies, official records. These are all examples of primary sources. Pag sinabi kong original document, ibig sabihin we are referring to the content, ha? We are not referring to the form. Pag sinabi kong original documents as primary sources, we are not referring to its form, but we are referring to its content. Yung nilalaman niya, ang original. Okay? For example, love letters. Okay? May mga love letters pa rin ba kayong mga tinatago? Ha?
yes.
Kasi may mga love letters dyan na tinatago pa rin.
Letters from friends lang po.
Letters from friends. Okay, letters from friends are examples of primary source. Kapag finotocopy mo ba yan, primary source pa rin ba siya? Joanna? 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 Hi, Joanna.
Sir?
Joanna,
Sir?
kapag ang letter,
Sir?
kapag ang love letter, ifinotocopy natin, primary source pa rin ba siyang matatawag?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Kasi
bakit?
original from...
Okay, very
original
good.
pa rin po yun, sir. Pinapotocopy mo lang po.
Very good. Kasi wala ka namang binago dun sa sulat. Tama, finotocopy mo lang. Walang nabago sa nilalaman. Kaya primary source pa rin siya. Okay, thank you, Joanna. Okay, another example of a primary source are creative works. Like for example, poetry, drama, novels, music, and art. Maalala ko tuloy nung kolehiyo ako. Okay? Maalala ko tuloy na nakapagsulat ako ng dalawang tula para dun sa aking iniibig nung ako'y kolehiyo. Diba? Kayo ba'y nakapagsulat na rin ng isang tula para sa inyong mga iniibig? Ha?
No, sir.
Sino yung nagsalita?
Hindi pa po.
Ay, di pa. Okay. So, sa mga kalalakihan, sino sa inyo nakapagsulat na ng isang tula para sa inyong iniibig?
Never tried, sir.
Ha? Wala?
Wala,
Wala, sir.
sir.
Wala pa? Ano na isulat na ninyo para sa inyong iniibig?
Open, sir.
Ha? Love letter, meron. Gideon, ikaw Gideon. Gideon, may we see Gideon? Gideon, magpakita ka nga. Gideon.
Sir.
Gideon. Pakita ka sa classmates mo.
Sir.
Kung ano mo yung video mo para makita.
Ay, nako.
Saan? Okay. Ito,
Sir, may ina yung gano'n.
mahina yung connection mo? Mahina daw yung connection niya. Okay.
Sir, unstable, nananamit.
Okay, sige. Wag na lang din. Sino kaya ang may malakas na connection? Okay, tignan natin si Gideon, si Bennett. Bennett? Lalaki ba si Bennett?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Bennett, may we see you please? Bennett, ikaw, meron ka mga naisulat na liham?
Wala pa, sir.
Mukhang kagigising mo ah. Okay.
Hindi, sir.
Bennett, meron ka ba wala ka pang naisulat na liham?
Wala pa, sir.
Wala pa. Okay. Wala kang balak sulatan ng liham sa mga classmates mo dito?
Di ko sure, sir.
Sure. Okay. Sige. Okay. You know, when I was in college, I was able to write 2 poems. Okay, for different ladies. Okay. Yung unang sinulat ko ay ang title ng pamagat ng tula ay If. English yung una ko na isulat. If. Parang ang tinutukoy niya ay kung hindi tayo magkaibigan, kung hindi tayo mag-best friend, siguro na in love na ako sa iyo, blah blah blah. Yung una. Yung pangalawa naman, yung tulang Filipino naman iyon. Ang pamagat naman ng tula ay luha sa aking mga mata. Na kahit na mag-break tayo, na kahit na ayaw mo sa parang punto niya is kahit na mag-break tayo at ayawan mo ako, hindi ako iiyak. Dahil ikaw ang luha sa aking mga mata. Dahil kung oras na iiyak ako, mawawala ka. So yun ang ibig sabihin ng pangalawang tula. These are creative works which can be considered as a primary source. O kaya nakapag-drawing na kayo, nakapagsulat na kayo ng isang awitin para sa inyong mga minamahal o para sa inyong inspirasyon. Yun ay mga halimbawa ng gawang sining. Creative works in Filipino ay gawang sining. Now, relics or artifacts, potteries, furniture, clothing, and buildings, mga lumang damit, ng nakaraan, and others. Okay? So these are all examples of relics or artifacts. Now, please keep in mind that a primary source reflects only one point of view and may contain a person's bias or prejudice toward an event. Please remember that. Always remember that. Ito ang mahirap pag primary source. Okay? Ito ang limitation ng isang primaryang batis. Na minsan, okay, isang pananaw lamang ang pinapakita niya, isang perspektibo lamang ang isinasalaysay niya, at maaaring magkaroon siya ng bias o subhektibong pagsasalaysay ng mga nakaraan. So, pwedeng merong bias yung primary source dahil nakabase lamang siya sa isang perspektibo o sa isang pananaw. Now, there are 4 categories of primary sources. The first one is written sources. The second one are images. Third are artifacts. And the fourth are oral testimonies. So these are the 4 categories of primary sources. There are those written primary sources. There are primary sources in the form of images, photos, and others. There are primary sources in the form of artifacts. There are primary sources in the form of oral testimonies or oral stories. Okay? Examples. books, magazines, and newspapers are primary sources. So kung for example, meron kayong gustong makita tungkol sa coronavirus, okay, mga salaysay tungkol sa coronavirus or stories about coronavirus, then we may refer from books, we may refer from magazines or newspapers. Okay? Another example, personal records, diaries, journals, and records. These are all examples of primary sources. Okay? Visual materials, okay? Paintings, drawings, and sculptures. These are examples of primary sources. Photographs, films, and maps. Okay. Kayo ba ay mahilig pa rin ba kayong magpa-print ng mga pictures, ng mga photos?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Pero ngayon wala na masyado yan, no? Usually nasa Facebook na lahat, nasa Instagram na lahat, nasa Twitter na lahat. But all the photos, all videos, and even all images that we upload in our social media accounts are examples of primary sources. Okay, mga yan. Another example, oral histories. Chronicles, memoirs, myths, legends passed down by word of mouth. For example, ang kwento ni Biwag at Malana, ang kwento ng ang alamat, halimbawa, these are oral histories, alamat ng pinya, alamat ng kasoy, alamat ng kung ano-anong mga alamat. Okay? These are all kwento ni Malakas at ni Maganda. Okay? Ngayon daw, meron ng bago, kwento ni Malakas at ni Mas Malakas. Okay? Hindi na daw kwento ni Malakas at ni Maganda, kundi kwento ni Malakas at ni Mas Malakas, o kwento ni Maganda at ni Mas Maganda, and others. Okay? Mga oral histories. Sigurado ako, maraming mga kwento, ng inyong mga lola sa inyo kung nabubuhay pa sila, no? Maaaring marami na sila mga kwento sa inyo tungkol sa nakaraan. Songs and poems are examples of primary sources. Okay? Anong halimbawa ng Ibanag song, for example? Yung anong Ibanag song? Yung Talagwerta. Okay? Alam ba ninyo yung kantang yung mga taga-Isabela? Alam ba ninyo yun? Yung Talagwerta. Okay? Talagwerta. What else? Olapaw. Okay? These are all examples of songs of primary sources. Okay? Songs of primary sources. Olapaw and Talagwerta in Ibanag. Ano pa sa Onaranyag, Abulan in Ilocano. These are all examples of primary sources. Or kaya, ano pa yung mga Ilocano songs alam niyo? Sa Itawes kasi wala masyadong kanta, wala masyadong awitin sa Itawes. Ang alam ko lang ay yung Yan Dua Imak in Itawes. O kaya lang
Manang Biday, sir.
That's Ilocano song. That's about courtship. That's a courtship song. Manang Biday, even Olapaw in Ibanag, it's a courtship song. Onaranyag, Abulan is a courtship song in Ilocano. So these are all examples of primary sources in songs and in poems. Another examples are artifacts, tools, ornaments, and objects. Yung mga yan, okay? Sa Kalinga, meron ba taga-Kalinga dito? Meron yung tinatawag nating mga, ano yun? Yung mga beads. Anong tawag doon? Mga taga-Kalinga. Yung mga taga-Kalinga sa inyo. Meron ba? Yung mga beads sa kulay-pula, okay, na pinapasa sa bawat henerasyon. Yan ay halimbawa ng ornaments. Okay? Ito yung repositories of historical sources. Ano yung ibig sabihin na repositories? Dito natin pwedeng makita yung mga primary sources. Okay, National Archives of the Philippines, marami tayong makikita dyan. National Library of the Philippines, National Historical Commission of the Philippines, National Museum of the Philippines. These are all repositories of primary sources. Ibig sabihin na repositories, these are all places where we could find these primary sources about historical events in the Philippines. Okay? So yung nakabisita na dito sa National Museum of the Philippines. Maganda yan. You know, kung meron lang tayong face-to-face, baka pwede tayo mag-field trip, no? Kaso bawal ang travel ngayon, bawal pa man itong mga bagay, kaya may hirapan tayo magkaroon ng field trip in our history class. Okay? Okay, ito pa rin. Stories of primary sources. Okay. UP Main Library at Murizal Library, BLSU Library in TAF. Okay, maganda to class. Dito kami nag-training in teaching readings in Philippine history sa De La Salle University, TAF. Okay, UST Library is also a good library. Library of Congress, National Archives and Records Administration, Archivo General de Indias. Ito ay sa Espanya. Archivo General de la Nación. Ito pa ay sa Espanya din. Marami tayong makikita tungkol sa Pilipinas dito kasi lalo na ang Pilipinas ay sakop ay kolonya ng Spain nung mga panahon ng 300 years, no? 300 plus years, 350 years I think. Okay, American Historical Collection sa Amerika meron din Lopez Memorial Museum, okay, Ayala Museum. These are all repositories of primary sources in the Philippines. Ito, kinds of primary sources. We have human fossils, Palauman, artifacts, mga ganyan. Royal decrees and laws. Okay. Meron yan sa Spain. Official reports. Later on, aralin natin yung official report tungkol sa yung nangyari sa Cavite. Okay, ito yung pag-aalsa ng mga workers sa Cavite Arsenal. Merong isang official report tungkol dyan. Aralin natin yan during the final term or during the midterms. Chronicles, katulad ng chronicle ni Magellan, ni Pigafetta, should I say, na manunulat ng expedition ni Magellan tungkol sa pag-ikot nila sa mundo. Friar account si Padre Chirino, yung tungkol sa Pilipinas. Dati-dati kasi mga praile o mga pari nagsusulat tungkol sa Pilipinas sa mga panahon na iyon. Okay. Maps are also primary sources, mga lumang mapa. Memoirs, katulad ni Aguinaldo, Memoirs of a General is an example of a memoir. Mga panulat ni Aguinaldo tungkol sa Philippine Revolution. Newspaper also, magazines, these are primary sources. Speeches and personal letters, these are primary sources. For example, transcript ng speeches ni Aquino, ni Duterte during SONA, these are all examples of primary sources. Online databases, okay, katulad ng LMS natin, pwede yan maging primary source. Blogs ay pwede rin primary source. Sino nagba-vlog dito? O vlog. Ano ibig sabihin ng vlog at vlog? Ang vlog ay usually written yung mga yan, mga nakasulat sa internet. Okay, vlogs ang tawag dyan. Vlogs naman is video log. Okay, yung mga videos mo na iniipon mo, nilalagay mo sa YouTube or any video sharing site. Okay, those are examples of vlogs for primary sources in electronic forms. Okay. Kinds of primary sources, documentary films are also examples of primary sources. Recorded interviews are also examples of primary sources. Okay, now we proceed to secondary source. Before I discuss your assessment for this week, okay? Break muna, mag-ano lang ako, inom lang ako saglit. Okay. Proceed to secondary source. Ano naman ibig sabihin ng secondary sources? These sources interpret and analyze primary sources. Okay. So ibig sabihin, ang sekundaryang batis, ito ay ang mga pag-aaral o pagsasalaysay ng mga pangyayari sa nakaraan na nakabatay dun sa panulat base sa primaryang batis. Okay. So anything, any event being written by a historian or by a writer, that such writer or historian refers his or his interpretation from a primary source is called secondary source. It's the writers or historians of secondary source are one or more steps removed from the event. But please take note that secondary source may have pictures, or graphics of class, pabit mo na inyong mga Zoom nang sa ganoon hindi ko marinig yung mga noises around you o yung mga disturbances around you. Pamute muna. you only unmute your Zoom if I would request you to unmute it. Okay, para sa walang disturbances. Okay. So yun po sabi natin, secondary source may have pictures or quotes or graphics of primary sources in them. For example, nagsulat ako ng isang sarili kong pagtatampok ng Philippine Revolution. At yung sarili kong pagtatampok tungkol sa Philippine Revolution ay nakabase doon sa panulat ni Emilio Aguinaldo. At lalagyan ko yun ng larawan ni Emilio Aguinaldo na isang primary source, yung larawan. Ibig sabihin, ang secondary source ay pwedeng maglaman ng mga primary sources. Pwede lang mangyari yun. Katulad ng ginawa natin ngayon doon sa inyong LMS, naglagay ako ng mga panulat doon, naglagay ako ng mga larawan ng mga prominenteng tao sa kasaysayan ng Pilipinas. Yung mga larawang iyon ay primary source, pero yung pagsasalaysay ko doon ay halimbawa ng secondary source. Yun yung tinatawag nating secondary sources. Examples. Publications such as textbooks, magazine or articles. Though ang textbook class ay in the new types of sources, classified na siya under tertiary source. Okay? So magazine articles are examples of secondary source. Histories, criticisms, commentaries, these are all examples of secondary source. Another example, biographies, newspapers, newspaper report. Kapag for example, ayon kay, newspaper report ay pag nag-refer siya, so ang ibig sabihin ng secondary source ay anything written or any event written in reference to a primary source are examples of secondary source. Do not be confused, ha? Anything written, any event written or narrated referring from or based on a primary source are examples of secondary sources. Okay, maliwanag ba yun? Okay? Tingnan natin kung tama yung aking pagpapaliwanag. Pakinggan natin itong may we listen from John May. John May? Okay, John May. John May.
Sir.
Okay, John May, magpakita ka nga. John May, gusto ko makita yung magmukha habang sasagutin mo itong tanong na ito. John May, okay ba connection mo, John May?
Sir, naglalag po.
Naglalag. Okay, sige. Antayin natin, tignan natin naglalag si John May. Regeline. 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 Reg. Wala si Regeline. Regeline, okay ka lang?
Sir.
Regeline,
hello. Hello, sir.
Pakita ka, Regeline.
Sir.
Regeline, pakita ka adin ko.
Sir, naglalag.
Naglalag ka, okay. Talagang mahina ang connection, no? Si Prince na lang. Prince.
Sir.
Okay na, Regeline?
Yes, sir.
Sir, kanina pa po connecting.
Okay, sige. Si Prince. Prince.
Ano po yun, sir?
Yes. Ano yung pinagkaiba ng primary source sa secondary source based from our discussion?
Ano po, sir? Yung primary resources po, sources yung parang mas madaling, mas madali siyang malaman. Ganun ba yun, sir?
Okay. Yan secondary source.
Parang yan yung katuloy ng primary, sir.
Okay. Lilinawin lang natin yun, ha, Prince. Pag sinabi natin primary source, ito ay, ang nilalaman nito original. Ibig sabihin, yung kinukwento doon sa primaryang Baptist ay naroon mismo yung manunulat nito doon sa pangyayari. Ibig sabihin, merong tayong tinatawag na parang first hand. Okay, first hand experience of a certain event, that is a primary source. Kapag, for example, ikaw, Meron kang diary. Okay. Meron kang diary. Yung diary mo, dahil ikaw mismo nagsulat yan, ay tinatawag nating primary source. Pero kapag meron kong kopya ng diary mo at ginawan ko ng panulat ang love story mo base dun sa diary mo, yung gawa ko ay tinatawag ng secondary source. Ay maliwanag, Prince, ang pinagkaiba niya.
Maliwanag po.
Okay.
Maliwanag po.
Ulitin ko, no? Nagsulat ka meron ka sariling diary. At isinulat
Yes, sir.
mo doon yung love story mo, halimbawa kay Molly Asis. Okay,
Wow.
love story mo with Molly. Okay, Molly, nandiyan ka ba, Molly? Molly, tayo mag-usap tatlo, Molly. Molly.
Sir.
Okay, Molly, pakita ka, Molly. Okay, Molly, halimbawa ganito, para maunawaan ng lahat yung pagkakaiba. Ay, maganda si Molly, ah. Molly, pakita ka, Molly.
Hindi pa ako naligo, sir.
Oh, Molly.
Ganda mo naman, Molly.
Kami naamoy Molly. Okay. Halimbawa, Molly. Molly, halimbawa, si Prince, meron siyang diary tungkol sa buhay pag-ibig niya. At ang buhay pag-ibig niya ay ikaw ang kanyang girlfriend, halimbawa ikaw ang kanyang kasintahan. At meron ka rin sariling panulat o sariling diary ng love story niya ni Prince. Okay? Yung sarili mong diary, Molly, tungkol sa love story mo ni Prince, at yung sariling diary ni Prince tungkol sa love story niya sa'yo, ay tinatawag nating primary source. Bakit? Dahil kayo mo ang bida sabing kwento at naroon kayo dun sa sarili nyong kwento, kaya tinatawag yan na primary source o primaryang batis. Dahil meron kayong tiwala sa akin, binigyan nyo ako ng kopya ng inyong diary. So si Prince merong kopya ng diary niya, binigay niya sa akin. Si Molly merong kopya ng kanyang diary, binigay niya sa akin. At gagawa ako ngayon ng istorya ng salaysay tungkol sa love story niyong dalawa. Okay? Yung ginawa ko ay tinatawag na secondary source. Bakit? Dahil nakabatay lamang yung kwento ko ng love story ninyo doon sa isinulat ninyo sa inyong diary. Maliwanag ba yung pinagkaiba ng secondary source primary source?
Yes, sir.
Maliwanag ba?
Yes, sir.
And Molly, ano ko bagay kayong dalawa? Prince and
Sir?
bagay kayong dalawa ni
Ano po?
Bagay kayong dalawa ni
Good po, sir.
Molly.
Hindi kita maintindihan, sir.
Molly, taga saan ka?
Tagailagan po.
Ikaw taga saan ka, Prince?
Nagailagan po. Sir, magka-schoolmate po kami.
Schoolmate ko siya.
Bagay kayong dalawa. Okay. So, ano pinagkaiba ng dalawa? Primary at saka primaryang batis. Primaryang batis at ang sekundaryang batis. Pero, si primaryang batis, for example, okay, nagsulat ako ng love story niyong dalawa, no? Nagsulat ako secondary source yun na, yung love story niyo. Tapos naglagay ako ng picture niyong dalawa. Yung picture ba primary source siya?
Hindi, sir? Ay, primary.
Ano, sir?
Kasi galing
Ano
sa
po, sir?
Story niyong dalawa. Okay, nagsulat ako ng love story niyong dalawa. Ngayon, dun sa ginawa ko love story niyong dalawa na secondary source, dahil nga ako ang nagsulat at hindi kayo, okay, nilagyan ko ng larawan ninyong dalawa. Yung larawan ba ninyong dalawa na naging bahagi nung sinulat ko tungkol sa inyong pag-ibig ay matatawag na primary source?
Oo, sir. Kasi galing sa amin yung picture na yun.
Very good, Prince. Primary source pa rin itong si picture. Kasi nga, mismo kayo yung nandun sa picture na iyon. Kaya ito yung sinasabi natin, ang primary source ay ang sukat ng primary source ay hindi nakabase doon sa forma nito. Nakabase ito doon sa nilalaman niya. So, secondary source may have primary source in them. Okay, klaro?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Class ngayon. Okay, yung mga ibang classmates niyo. Klaro ba ang pagpapaliwanag ko ng pinagkaiba ng tertiary at ng secondary source? Based from our example.
Yes.
Yes,
sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes po.
Okay, so kung maliwanag yan, dapat tandaan niyo yan kasi nasa quiz yan. Okay, nasa quiz yan next meeting. Okay? Now, we continue our discussion. You may now mute Molly and Prince.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Another example of secondary source are the following. Textbooks, biographies, and others. Okay, now, yung mga halimbawa, we proceed to tertiary source. Meron tayong tinatawag na tertiary source. Anong ibig sabihin naman ng tertiary source? Ibig naman sabihin nito, these are publications that summarize and digest the information in primary and secondary sources to provide background of a topic, idea, or event. Okay. Ito ang pinagkaiba niya. Pag sinabi natin sa secondary source ay nag-refer siya sa primary source para magsalaysay, upang magsalaysay na nasabing pangyayari, yan ay secondary source. Class, inom na ako, hinihingal ako. Ano naman ang tertiary source? Ang tertiary source naman, kapag pinagsama-sama niya ang secondary source para makabuo ng isang salaysay tungkol sa isang pangyayari, yan ay matatawag na tertiary source. Halimbawa, encyclopedia, biographical dictionary. Ang biography ay sinasabi natin sa biography ay sinasabi ang biography ay pwedeng secondary at pwedeng primary. Pagka biography ay sinulat ng ibang tao, tinatawag yan na secondary. Kapag autobiography o gawin panulat ng sariling tao na kwento ang sariling pamumuhay, ang sariling buhay, yan ay primary. Pag pinagsama-sama yung mga yan, yan ay tinatawag ng tertiary source. Ang Wikipedia ay halimbawa ng tertiary source dahil kung sino ang nag-e-edit ng laman ng Wikipedia. Kaya huwag kayong mag-refer sa Wikipedia. Kasi kung sino-sino nag-e-edit ng laman niyan. Okay, yan ay halimbawa ng isang tertiary source. Okay? Now, before we end our discussion now, please allow me to explain to you your assessment for this week. Okay. Allow me to explain to your assessment. Okay, now, for this week, this is what I would like you to do to check whether you have understood whether you have understood the primary source from a secondary source. Ito ang gagawin ninyo. You're going to examine a certain event in Philippine history, and that event is about the Tejeros Convention. Maalala niyo yung nag-away sila, nag-away ang Magdalo at Magdiwang sa isang convention, sa isang convention ng KKK, ng Katipunan. Okay, ito ang gagawin ninyo, ang aralin ang pangyayaring ito sa kasaysayan ng Pilipinas. Una, babasahin ninyo ang isang primary source na mismong sinulat ni Santiago Alvarez. Si Santiago Alvarez ay nandoon nung panahon na nangyayari yung Tejeros Convention, yung panahon na nagkaroon ng hidwaan ang Magdalo at ang Magdiwang na dalawang faction doon sa nasabing Katipunan o ng KKK. Okay. Yung pangalawa naman ay isang sekundaryang batis sa sulat ni Teodoro Agoncillo sa Revolt of the Masses. Si Teodoro Agoncillo ay isang manunulat na wala doon sa pangyayari nung sinulat niya yung nasabing Tejeros Convention. So you examine these two accounts. Babasahin niyo itong dalawang account na ito. Now, paano nyo gagawin? Gagamit tayo ng format na PAST. P-A-S-T. You read two accounts. Basahin mo na ninyo yung dalawang account. Okay? Ngayon, pagkabasa niyo yung dalawang account, kailangang sagutan ninyo ang mga questions na ito. Okay? Using the acronym PAST. Okay. P for purpose. What was the object used for? Or what does the text say? Ano ang sinasabi nung account na iyon? A. Author. Sino ang gumawa o sino ang sumulat ng nasabing pagsasalaysay? Siyempre, ilagay niyo kung ano yung background ng author. Sino si Santiago Alvarez, sino si Teodoro Agoncillo. S for Island. May bias ba? Ano ang bias si Santiago Alvarez? Ano naman ang bias si Teodoro Agoncillo? Doon sa kanyang panulat, doon sa kanyang salaysay tungkol sa Tejeros Convention. T. Time period. Kailan isinulat yung nasabing account? At ano ang nangyayari noong mga panahon na isinusulat yung nasabing account? Yun ang yung sasagutin. Maliwanag ba? Maliwanag, class?
Yes, sir.
Okay, ngayon.
Yes, sir.
Okay, bibigay ko na yung task, no?
Yes, sir.
Allow me to share the LMS. Okay, mag-login ako. Hanggang Saturday ito, class, ha? Hanggang Saturday na 9 p.m. ang pag-submit ng tasks na ito. So, bibigay ko na. Okay, hanggang August 20, i-edit natin ito. So hanggang, ilagay natin hanggang September 5. Okay, so hanggang September 5 na 9 p.m. activity na ito. Maximum score is 30. Content is 22 points. Grammar is 8 points. So class, nakikita ba ninyo? Nakikita ninyo, class?
Sir. Yes, sir.
So, I already have provided a scanned copy of the source, no? Ito yung kay Santiago Alvarez. Ito naman ay yung kay Teodoro Agoncillo. You download these accounts, basahin muna ninyo itong dalawang account na ito bago nyo kompletuhin itong worksheet na ito. Ito ang worksheet natin, papakita ko. Okay, ito ang worksheet. Yan. I-fill out po ninyo iyan. Okay? Isa para kay Santiago Alvarez at isa na ganito, kopyahin na lang ninyo ito para kay Teodoro Agoncillo. Okay? Clear? Clear?
Sir, yung gagaw...
Sir.
Sir, yung gagaw... Sir, I
Yes.
have a question, sir.
Yes,
Sir, yung gagawin din namin na pastor is isa para kay Teodoro, then isa para kay Tejeros.
Isa kay Teodoro Agoncillo, isa kay Santiago Alvarez. So ibig sabihin, pero the same file lang, ha. I-copy lang niyo ito, copy, tapos mag-paste lang kayo ng panibagong, ilagay niyo sa ilagay lang niyo sa panibagong sheet, panibagong page. Okay, tapos lagyan niyo ng title dito, for example, kay Santiago Alvarez, yung dito naman ay yung kay Teodoro Agoncillo. Okay, clear? Klaro ba, class?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm pleased, ha. I know
Yes, sir.
I know it would be difficult for you to do all these tasks, kaya isa-isa lang per week ang binibigay ko kasi meron pa kayong mga ibang subjects, ha?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Also for responding timely with our tasks kasi halos sa atin nagsisend ka agad na inyong mga tasks. Thank you for that. Of course, you have to check the quality of your submissions also. Ang deadline po nito ay 9 p.m. ng Saturday, this coming Saturday. So you please download the materials, you study the materials, and until 9 p.m. of this coming Saturday. Okay, then next meeting, that will be next week. We will continue our discussion in historical method, and after that, we will have your first quiz in our class. Okay, clear ba tayo?
Next week, then yung quiz, sir.
Next week pa ang quiz. Depende kung
Thank you, sir.
Tuesday or Thursday. Kasi feeling ko baka discussion pa tayo ng Tuesday. Kasi medyo mahaba pa yung topic na iyon on historical method kasi hindi pa natin natapos yung test of authenticity and test of credibility. check muna natin yun by Tuesday siguro. Then siguro Thursday na ang quiz ninyo. I'll give you time to review naman, ha?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
I will
Yes, sir.
our meeting now. Salamat. Okay? Okay, so keep safe, everyone. I'll post the recorded version of our discussion now in our LMS, okay?
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sir.
Lahat kayong
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye.
Sige.
Goodbye, sir.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, sir.
Bye, sir. Thank you, sir.
Bye, sir. Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
sir.
Bye, sir.
Bye, sir.
Pasensya na kayo, hindi ko na kayo ma-add sa Facebook, ha, yung mga nag-invite sa akin. Okay, kasi 5,000 na ata yung friend ko, ha? Pasensya na kayo. But you can always message me in Facebook.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Sir, sorry kanina ang bagal talaga ng net.
Okay, no problem. I understand.